You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello and welcome back to the official Deaf Crocodile Podcast. Today, with my rotating slew of guests, I have Mr. Zachary K. Bryant from They Live by Film. Zach, how we doing?
I'm doing good, Ryan. How are you doing?
Doing well. Nice to have you on here. I know that you are just as big of a fan of Deaf Crocodile stuff as I am.
Yes. Craig and Dennis have taken quite a bit of my money. I really appreciate it.
Well, speaking of them, they are the guest of honor today. We have Craig and Dennis both on the line. Thanks for coming back, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Kind of feel like we have to be here. It's the official Deaf Crocodile Podcast.
And we've got Violet, our QC master in the house. Yes. Craig's kitty Violet.
She is sleeping in my arms.
Oh,
it's perfect.
And Zach, do I see a kitty tower in your background?
Oh yeah, there's two of them on top there. They're gonna it's probably gonna be a fight here in a minute. So you'll get to see it, but the guests won't. So we'll see which one falls.
Well, in the last month, we had the release of In the Moscow Slums. How have you guys felt about the reception to that film?
You know, we're very happy. People really seem to be into it. It's the third Karin Shakhnazarov film that we've put out after Zero Grad, which is his kind of surreal Monty Python meets Franz Kafka movie about the breakup of the Soviet Union. And then did a really fascinating film called The Assassin of the Tsar, starring Malcolm McDowell as a man who is in a mental institution and believes that he was the assassin of two of the Russian czars. And it's a kind of psychological drama / time travel movie. It was filmed in both Russian language and English language versions. And Shakhnazarov has been for several decades the head of Mosfilm, which is Russia's oldest film studio, as well as being a very acclaimed filmmaker. And this is his most recent movie, which is adapted from the famous Sherlock Holmes story, The Sign of the Four, but does not actually have Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in it. And in their place, he has two famous real-life historical figures from Russia, Konstantin Stanislavski, who was a famous theater director and acting teacher of the Stanislavski method, and Vladimir Gilyarovsky, who was a hard-hitting journalist who wrote about the Katrovka slums, which is where Shaknazarov's new film is set. It's kind of like Moscow's equivalent of London's Whitechapel circa Jack the Ripper. And it's really beautiful period drama, and like many of Shaknazarov's movies, is about the kind of tension between real life, history, and the artistic interpretation of that history. And many of his films, including Zero Grad and The Assassin of the Tsar, are about the kind of blurring of the lines between reality and the artist's interpretation of reality. And certainly in the Moscow Slums kind of continues his exploration of those themes. And it's also a really wonderful period detective movie for anyone who likes the most recent, like Kenneth Branagh, Agatha Christie films, Hercule Poirot movies, and I count myself among them. I love a good period detective film. It, just on that level, it's really wonderful. So,
I was one thing I really liked because I just watched it this morning was that there's a playfulness that I think is really a big part of like Sherlock Holmes stories. I grew up reading them a lot, and I feel like it's kind of something missing that I see a lot. Like when I watch a lot, there's a lot of I guess you'd say postmodernism, or at least insincerity with a lot of like modern retellings or anything like that. You mentioned the Brana ones, and I do like those. I do think they miss like a little bit of playfulness because they're very self-serious. And I think I liked what I liked about Moscow is there was like these little gags in it, like with Pongo. I think my favorite part is like when Pongo, like, he says, "Go away," and he just like slowly like lowers himself like away from the window. I think it's a great gag. It's very funny.
Yeah. You see a lot of that in Zero Grad as well. There's a lot of amazing surreal humor. It's almost at times like a Wes Anderson movie, especially in Zero Grad when they descend into the subterranean museum of 1,000 years of Russian history, and all of the mannequins are actual live actors trying to freeze, but you can see that they're real people. And it feels very much like the sort of surreal dollhouse world of Wes Anderson's movies, which I also really love. I agree. Actually, of the Branagh movies, the third one I think is by far the most successful, my favorite, the most recent one, A Haunting in Venice. I think.
Oh yeah,
beautiful set. Just looks beautiful all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's the one where he sort of found his rhythm. The first two, maybe a little too glossy for my tastes. I love the late 70s Death on the Nile is one of my favorite, probably my single favorite Agatha Christie Hercule Poirot adaptation.
And of course, I've seen the first two, and I haven't seen the last one yet. And everyone says the third one was the best, so I'm like, I need to track it down.
It's really
I
fun.
need to track it down.
Yeah,
I still haven't seen Death on the Nile. I think that was a COVID. That was like in the middle of like COVID when that came out, right?
Had to have been.
It's very slick. It's entertaining, and they have a ton of name stars in it. But I still really love the late 70s version with David Niven and Mia Farrow and Jane Birkin and Peter Ustinov. Oh my God, so many great stars. Bette Davis. There's a sort of theatricality to it that is kind of borderline camp, but works so brilliantly. I saw it when it first came out, and it's always been one of my favorite, like, guilty pleasure movies that I just adore watching again and again.
Well, before we get into our two announcements for the month of October, one thing I do want to compliment, I am always jealous of Dennis's brain. The amount of Russian names that you have memorized, and Czechoslovakian animators from 1934 that you just happen to have ready to be able to preach about. One thing that leads to, though, is having a deep knowledge of pretty much everything. And that's come up recently because there's been this bout of titles being discussed online surrounding piracy. And this has been a thing that's been a problem for many of these boutique labels for years. I remember, I think it was right at the height of the start of the pandemic, Third Window Films over in the UK was posting their frustrations that they had a film that they just spent a lot of time remastering, a lot of money went into it, and they released it. And if you Googled the title of the film, the entire first page was just places to illegally download it. Nothing related to where you could buy their film, a Blu-ray release or anything, but those were the most visited sites is where you could illegally download that. For those that are listening to this and have never considered piracy because either they are supporting boutique labels, or maybe they're listening to this because they're interested in these titles and they may want to download them later, how does piracy affect these smaller labels, Craig? What do you feel about these people that are downloading torrents of some of these, these films that have been perhaps lost for many decades, or titles that people have held close to their hearts that they've wanted to see people put out, and now in 2024, Deaf Crocodile is releasing some of these obscure titles?
I could easily come down on the side of, like, full stop, it's illegal, stop that shit. But I understand it's also a little more complicated than that, because and the people who like to pirate things love to climb up on this moral mountain of how they're saving cinema, because lots of these films, there's no other way that they're available. And I kind of get that, but that defense kind of goes out the window when a boutique label does track down the elements and spends the money to license it and spends the time and money to restore it and spends the money to manufacture Blu-rays and puts all of that time and effort into giving these forgotten films a new launch and new lease on life, and those same people decide to steal that as well, because you're not saving cinema at that point, you're just stealing. And that's it came up on Facebook last week because somebody it's reached the point where stealing films is become it's been so normalized that this person tagged us in a post saying that they were looking forward to buying one of our releases, but the other one they were going to wait for it to show up on a torrent site and just download it, and tagged us in that post. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, why would you tag us in a post telling us that you're going to steal our product? Like, that's just insanity. But that's how normalized it's become. Like, they don't even think it's stealing.
Well, it kind of gets conflated, right? Because there are like these few positive examples of where it works. You have like probably the first example to think of is when Paul Schrader wanted to put out his director's cut of Dying Light. He just said, screw it, I'll do it myself and upload it on Internet Archive. Watch it all you want, I don't care. Which is good. He got to get his version out because it was taken from him. That's cool. These streaming services that put on movies and then take them and there's no way to buy them, and then they end up on torrent sites, there is like a preservation element to it. But the problem is people just take those few positive examples and say, well, that's everything. This should just all be free.
Right. And the example I used is that, and I haven't been on there in years, but I can't even remember the name of the website, but they focused on live bootlegs of music. And they were really well moderated site where anything, if it had ever been released officially, was just banned from the site. Like if there was a bonus track on a box set that was a live version of something, that could never be put on their site. So it was only stuff that there was never an official release of, which is where this curatorial, morality of like we're protecting and saving this stuff comes from. And I kind of get that. I mean, we've discovered some things online. We've just seen a really crappy video of something online on YouTube or something. We're like, oh, that looks interesting. So I can kind of see that point. But once it's had an official release, then that's no longer the case. I'm like, even if it's out of print, I'm like, I'm sorry you missed it, but it's not like you're saving cinema. That disc is out there, like it's available. So I mean, I get both sides, but it's reached the point where everyone just feels like everything should be free. And if you can't, I had one guy on Twitter arguing with me that everything should be free and you should come up with a different business model to support yourself, because if the train has left the station, you're everything is free. And I was like, no, that's not the world we live in.
Yeah. And it's a really short-sighted, right? Like, because if you guys aren't restoring some of these movies, they just wouldn't be available anyway.
Oh yeah, a lot of what we put out would still be unavailable. In some cases, would still be pretty much completely lost, like Sal Watts's amazing 1974 independent black crime film Solomon King, which was a lost movie. And then we worked with his wife, Belinda Burton Watts, who was amazing, and the UCLA Film and TV Archive, who are an incredible resource and champion of preservation to restore the film and make it widely available again. But, I have I have a little bit different view of piracy. I actually wrote a book that dealt with piracy in the pre-digital era, film collectors and film dealers, and the efforts by the MPAA and the Justice Department to kind of stamp out film collecting under the assertion that it was film piracy and trafficking in stolen materials. And in many cases, film collectors were saving and preserving materials that would have otherwise been lost. One of the people I interviewed for the book was the former head projectionist for the American Cinematheque, Paul Rayton, and he had saved 4-track mag prints of a number of Warner Brothers films, including Rebel Without a Cause, that were being dumped by the studio because they felt that they didn't have to save the stereo masters. And in some cases, the prints that he saved are the only existing true stereo elements from which they later had to take the audio. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence for the studios taking very bad care of their own legacy, and collectors in particular helping to preserve that. In terms of digital piracy, I would say that's a little different. It's a much more vast and kind of untamable landscape. I think YouTube is the biggest pirate in the history of piracy, bar none.
Yeah, I mean, and you had mentioned you search the film name and the first page of Google right is all pirate sites. That's YouTube is Google. Like they're both they seem to do nothing and don't care about piracy. I mean, they have the ability to filter out pirate sites. That they just they could at a drop of a hat they could make those searches not show up. But they don't. They clearly do not care that piracy is illegal. They just don't care.
Yeah, here's my personal attitude. Don't post anything that you don't actually own the rights to, whether it's a song or whether it's a movie. Like, if you don't actually own it, don't put it online, and try not to stream things that are posted illegally, because none of that is going back to the content creators. Like, we go to great care not only to license these films, restore them from the best surviving materials, but also to pay the rights holders. I'll give an example. Belinda Burton Watts, Sal Watts' wife and widow, we licensed the rights to Solomon King from her and the Sal Watts estate, and we've actually paid her a substantial amount of money from the royalties for Solomon King being released on Blu-ray, streaming, theatrical, and she's been very appreciative. So if you're posting that film illegally, it literally means that it's money that's not going to the copyright holder, to the wife of the filmmaker. So that I think that's pretty simple. If you don't own it, if you didn't actually create it, I mean, in the case of Paul Schrader, you can make the argument. I don't know if he produced that film, but assuming someone else put up the money, but he's the filmmaker, and if he wants to post the his director's cut, I mean, I think that's kind of cool, and it gets it out there, and I can see an argument absolutely for that. But if you've just happened to come across a rip on some site, and then most of the posts that we see for films that we've licensed and restored on YouTube are literally somebody reposting someone else's repost of an original rip that came from God knows where. And one, it's not a great way to experience the films, and two, it actually does take money away from the content creators. A couple of years ago, I was listening to an interview on the radio from somebody who's a media scholar who said that this is a great time to be a content consumer because there's so many ways to access media, and it's a really difficult time to be a content creator and find a way to survive in this landscape by monetizing your creative work. And I've actually worked both sides of the fence, both as a filmmaker, writer, producer who's created content, as well as a distributor who's trying to help monetize that content and return revenue to the rights holders. And piracy, especially for boutique labels, does hurt. If you're Warner Brothers, if you're Universal,
right? That big FBI warning that's at the front of all the discs you rent, or even in the theaters, where it says, piracy is not a victimless crime, and most people look at it and just kind of laugh it off because they're thinking, who cares if I stream this film from Universal Studios? They're not going to feel it. I was like, yeah, but you're doing the same thing to these tiny little boutique labels where it really is hurting. Like it's hurting the boutique label, it's hurting the rights holder and the filmmakers. A few thousand lost sales is massive to a boutique label. A large studio might not feel it. Like that's a rounding error for them. But for the boutique labels that are the people that are trying to save these films, the obscure films, foreign films, experimental films, these are the films that the pirates are suggesting they're trying to save when they're hurting the only people that are trying to save them. The studios aren't interested in those films. So the only person you're hurting when you steal all this stuff is the people that you supposedly support. It just doesn't make any sense.
It's especially true about a smaller label like Deaf Crocodile, where all these people that have loved a lot of what you've done so far love the curatorial sense that you have brought to the table. So obviously, if you like at least one of the films enough to go and illegally stream it or download it or buy a bootleg, you're probably going to like something else from them. So on that point, you're literally shooting yourself in the foot because the company might not be able to last as long because you're not helping fund them.
Yeah, instead of streaming or uploading these wonderful films that no one's heard of, reach out to a boutique label and say, hey, have you heard of this film? You should check it out. I mean, we get it's almost daily at this point, people reaching out to us with lists of films that they would love to see on Blu-ray, and that's how you can help save those films. Don't steal them.
Yeah. And if you're really
try to help find a way to get those film elements found and restored and released. Throwing up a crappy bootleg is not saving cinema. You're
Yeah, and if you're really interested in film preservation, I would say support the people that are out there doing it day by day. UCLA Film and TV Archive, the Academy Film Archive, Museum of Modern Art, places that are actually out there trying to preserve, restore, and properly store these.
And that goes beyond just saving access to these films. You can help literally save the film elements. Belinda had the film elements that she had. She had the soundtrack in her closet. It had been in her closet for 40 plus years. That's not how you properly store elements. So once we reached out to her and we were able to get a proper restoration of the film with the UCLA had a print, she had the audio. We've got everything now, it's being properly stored, in a proper archive for her now. So it's not going to get lost. It's not going to deteriorate. So you've that's an example of the access is now available to everyone, but also the original elements are being properly stored now, because that's where a lot of these obscure films, they're not in a archive sometimes, especially the small independent stuff, the filmmakers probably have it in their closet somewhere. So reaching out to those people, finding the elements, restoring the elements, and then usually, because a lot of times, the archives will gladly take this stuff and archive it because they want to preserve it. Getting the elements properly stored is a huge part of preserving these films. Because there's going to be invariably, no matter what we do and put out, we could put out an amazing 4K HDR restoration. At some point down the road, there's going to be some other format, and you're going to have to go back to those original elements. And if they're gone, then they're gone. So having them properly stored is important.
Well, and we've seen that. So one of our upcoming releases that we're super excited about is Michael Schock's amazing kind of adult animated cat movie, Felidae, which is this gothic horror film mystery set in the world of domestic cats that was made in the early 90s in Germany. And it took us years to track down the rights, to negotiate, convince the rights holders to actually license them to us. We had to pay to have the original camera negative scanned and the original audio transferred. And when they shipped the camera negative to the post-production lab in Germany, the lab discovered that the negative was starting to go vinegar, suffering from vinegar syndrome, because it hadn't apparently been properly stored, or maybe it just went vinegar. It can happen. Vinegar syndrome can actually leap from print to print, like an airborne virus. And we were able to scan it, and it went through, and it looks great. But in a couple of years, in all likelihood, that OCN for Felidae is going to be lost, unusable. So it's a really good thing that we got to it now. And this is a film that was made in the early 1990s. So we're not talking about a film from the 30s, 40s, or 50s. This is a movie that's basically 30 years old, and the negative is gone vinegar. So there are a lot of contemporary films, especially films that were done by independent producers or independent filmmakers. Studio content, for the most part, is relatively safe, although there are a lot of instances of studios, not taking great care of their legacy, but by and large now they're much better at it. But there are still tons and tons. We're talking tens of thousands.
And considering the history of how studios treat their elements, it would not surprise me at some point that somebody in an office somewhere dictates that just go scan all the negatives, and once we have a digital file, throw away the negatives because we don't want to pay for the storage. I can completely see that happening.
Well, that has happened in the past. Warner Brothers, their early 2-color experiments, at some point, I think it was in the 1950s when Jack Warner was in charge of the studio, basically said, we don't need these elements anymore, and they just dumped them. So they've only been able to rescue those movies from like existing prints that were saved by archives and or collectors. So yeah, there's a lot of instances of studios purging nitrate prints and nitrate negatives because they were afraid of the fire danger, and throwing out trims and outtakes. And so, but most of the films that we deal with are from either overseas distributors, overseas archives, in some cases, like with Solomon King, working directly with the filmmaker's estate and UCLA, who held a print of, I think, the only surviving complete print of the original version of the film. And we are really lucky that there are a number of archives that we work with, like the NFI in Budapest in Hungary, Mosfilm, the Narodny Film Archive in Prague. the CNC Romanian Film Center and the Romanian Film Archive that do go to great lengths to work with us and properly preserve their materials. In many cases, they will, make a new scan of a film element, or we will offer to pay to make a new scan. So I'm a huge fan and admirer and supporter of film archives worldwide for all the work that they're doing. And we work, if you look at the credits in our releases, more often than not, you will see us profusely thanking, people at film archives around the world. And that's the way we're able to put these films up.
Right. And you even usually make sure that if a film was recommended to us, that you've shout out their name, like, oh, thank you so and so for putting this film on our on our radar. Because we I don't think it wasn't intentional, but we do specialize in films nobody's ever heard of, and occasionally one that even Dennis hasn't heard of slips through the cracks, and we snatch those up.
Oh yeah, 2 movies that we're putting out. One in December, Jerzy Weiss's amazing black and white Czech kind of dark fantasy film, The Golden Fern, was recommended to me by my friend Jody Wiley, who's the a filmmaker behind The Source Family and Welcome Space Brothers. It's a new documentary about the Unarius Academy of Science, kind of an alternative UFO-themed spiritual center out in the desert here in Southern California in the 70s and 80s. She recommended The Golden Fern, and then we're putting out in spring, early summer of next year, this amazing Lithuanian rock opera called The Devil's Bride. Just sort of like the Lithuanian Jesus Christ Superstar. And it is amazing. It's entirely sung. So it's a little bit like Umbrellas of Cherbourg, where there's no dialogue. All of the narrative, all of the plot is conveyed through songs and the song lyrics. And it's amazingly bonkers and wonderful. And that was another film that was recommended to us, and we got in touch after much detective work with the Lithuanian Film Center, and they had done a beautiful restoration of the film. They were kind of amazed that we were interested in it. They were like, "How did you hear about The Devil's Bride?" And I was like, we had a fan of our label email us and say, "Hey, I think this is your kind of a movie." And as it turns out, they were absolutely right. And we love it, and hopefully we'll introduce it to a much wider audience.
Perfect example of how you preserve a film's access to the world. You reach out to a boutique label, we track it down, and we put it out. You don't just steal it.
Well, and if you are uploading things or even downloading somebody else's illegal stream and feeling high and mighty that you're supporting film preservation, one easy way that can help replace that for you, many of these archives are nonprofits and do different fundraisers every single year just to survive. And you think it's expensive for all of us to be able to go to restaurants and pay bills and all that. If you've got just a little bit of money, you can make some of these archives weak just by, hey, we'd like to put in a small donation. And that is an easy way to put your money where your mouth is.
Oh, yeah, there are, and I know because I've spoken with the archivists who kind of, they kind of wail in frustration that they have far more material than they have funds to adequately restore and make available, and they wish that they had more resources and more funds.
Yeah, I mean, that's every archive around the world. You know, they're sitting on a treasure trove of material, and they've got a skeleton staff and no money. They would love to be able to scan all of this stuff, but they have a limited budget, and they schedule out like, well, here's how many films we can do this year, and then they have to go through what they have and make the, I'm sure, very difficult choices of which films will get scanned and which ones will just have to sit in the archive and wait. I mean, I know I've seen videos with is it the Smithsonian Archive, the one in DC or outside of DC?
Library of Congress,
where they're lamenting what they decide to preserve and scan or try to make a dupe negative of is being dictated completely by which of these elements will survive another year. And it's almost like you're in the ER and you have so many people in need of help. Which ones are you just going to let die because you can't get to them all? And that's how these archives are dealing with a lot of the material they have. They don't have the resources to do it all. So,
which will end up costing them more in the long run too.
Yeah, and so again, that's where a lot of times where boutique labels, like us and all the others, can really help the archives, because we'll come in and we're like, look, we'll pay you, for access to this material, which is funds they're not going to get otherwise. So like they a lot of sometimes films that we want access to because we are going to be paying licensing fees. Those films may have not been on their to-do list, but now they've got funds available to do it. So some of those films will get done that otherwise wouldn't have been scanned.
Oh yeah, very often now with our licensing deals, the rights holders will say, okay, we can do this, but only if you include X amount to cover the cost of a new scan. And usually it comes down to the discussion between me and Craig. Well, that's more money, but if we don't do it, it's probably just going to sit there and not get done. And in the case of Felidae, if we had not been really persistent and kept sort of nagging the rights holders over and over for several years, that negative would be gone. Now, assuming there's hopefully an IP or an IN or a release print, we don't know, but the original camera negative is going to be unusable in a couple of years for Felidae. And fortunately, we did a beautiful 4K scan, and so.
And like I mentioned previously about how important it is that the original elements are preserved as well. We had licensed Rock and Roll Wolf, and they had told us that they had an HD element available, and they sent us the files they had. And when I looked at it, I told Dennis, and I know Dennis was very excited about this title, but I was like, we can't use this. Like, it was a
that's a heartbreaker.
It was a really bad, like, HD interlaced telecine from a. It was not good. Like the quality was really bad. And so we're like, well, I guess we're not releasing that film. But we asked him, we're like, I'm sorry, but this element won't pass any QC standard. Is there any chance you can do a new scan if you do have the elements? And they came back and they're like, yeah, we can do that. So now we have a brand new scan from the negative of that film, which is light years better than what they had preserved previously.
Oh yeah, this is going to be another one that blows people.
Which is like I said, if you and when they made that original telecine, that was probably considered, this is as good as we can get it. But yeah, technology marches on. So if they had if they hadn't thought long term and had just scanned their archive and disposed of the elements, that would have been it. So it's really important that the original source elements, no matter how great you think your digital master is, technology will continue to improve. You need to hold on to the original elements because you're going to want to go back to it.
I don't know if we've announced these yet or not, but in spring we're putting out a 2-film set of movies by the Romanian female fantasy director Elisabeta Bostan. And the first, Kingdom in the Clouds, is a really wonderful late 60s kind of Alexander Petrushko-like fantasy film, but I think her masterpiece is a mid-70s, another deranged rock opera called Mama Rock and Roll Wolf, which was a Romanian Soviet-French co-production. And essentially, it is like the musical Cats as done by Sid and Marty Krofft. And it is performed by members of the Bolshoi Ballet and the Moscow Circus, who are all wearing anthropomorphic, furry animal costumes. So they are wolves and sheep and red squirrels, and they're all frolicking around this sort of fantasy village singing glam rock songs in Romanian. And then the last third of the movie becomes a Romanian ice capades and is performed entirely on skates. And I know it sounds like I'm making this up. And when I hear myself, I'm like, this movie doesn't really exist. It does. It's called Mama Rock and Roll Wolf, and it is one of the most jaw-droppingly insane, beautiful, and surreal musicals ever made. It's actually a beloved favorite in Scandinavia, like Norway and Sweden. They run it every year on TV, I think dubbed and recut. And now we have this beautiful new scan from the camera negative of the original Romanian language version, and we're going to put it out in the spring with another of Elisabeta Bostan's movies, and that's an example. Like if we hadn't kind of pressed them and said, hey, you know, we love this movie, this crazy, you know, glam rock musical on ice skates from the 70s, they wouldn't have made a new scan, and we wouldn't now be able to share Elisabeta Bostan's remarkable fantasy filmmaking with a wider audience. So that's, for us, that is the true joy, is being able to kind of shine a light on the work of these amazing filmmakers, teams of you know, artists, craftspeople, actors, production designers, cinematographers. We didn't make these movies. We are just in the business of trying to present the very best possible versions of remarkable films that, for whatever reasons, have slipped through the cracks.
I did have a quick question. So I've seen through like different comments when you guys have posted stuff, always a question about why isn't this in 4K? And so when you talk about things like Felon Day and where the elements are almost about to go kaput, is that really when that decision of this is our last chance to maybe get the best scan we can with the original now, so we'll do 4K? Or how does that really factor in? Or was it a different sort of decision that made that?
No, the whether to release 4K or not is usually, it's a combination of, does the source element have the resolution to make that make any sense to bother doing? And honestly, the just as big of decision making is will this sell well enough to cover the cost? Because unfortunately, it's still significantly more expensive to put out a 4K release than a Blu-ray, a standard Blu-ray release. And you know, we're a very small boutique label. You know, we don't sell that many units, and it takes quite a few to just recoup the costs. So we have to look at the accounting and go, all right, well, if we expect to sell this many, will that even get us to break even? And you know, it just doesn't make. We'll put ourselves out of business if we just put everything out in 4K. We'd be done very quickly.
Yeah, it is a lot more expensive because you have to do an HDR grade, so you have to do a new color grade.
Every step of the process costs more. 4K scan costs more than a 2K
authoring, you're doing two discs. And for a lot of these movies that we put out, they are complete discoveries for us and for our audience. Films that a lot of people have never even heard of before. Helmut Herbst's The Cathedral of New Emotions, this unbelievable, psychedelic, surreal German animated sci-fi movie that we're putting out in Germany, is utterly mind-bending. It's sort of like Ralph Bakshi animating an R-rated version of John Carpenter's Dark Star.
I'm sold.
It's amazing. And the few people we've now shown it to are like, holy crap. This is possibly the weirdest and most surreal animated film I've ever seen. It's Belladonna of Sadness.
Dennis always likes to compare it to Belladonna of Sadness.
It's true.
Belladonna of Sadness is a pretty straightforward film compared to Cathedral of New Emotions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Cathedral of New Emotions was a project the filmmaker Helmut Herbst passed away a couple of years ago. He was a well-known German experimental animator and documentarian. He'd been working on for, I think, decades in various versions. It was finally finished around 2006, never released in any format as far as I can tell. And that's another one where we paid Herbst's wife, Renata Merck, to make a new scan of the original film elements so that we could put it out. And basically, it's about a commune of stoner German leftist hippies who are set adrift in a packing container held by a giant floating hand drifting through interstellar space. And basically the commune descends into sort of moral, political, and sexual chaos to this amazing, throbbing krautrock soundtrack. So it's sort of like listening to the early Syd Barrett Pink Floyd albums, stoned out of your mind as you're drifting through space. And, it's amazing. Like a Mighty Mouse smashes into the windscreen of the packing container, and one of the Hawkmen from the Flash Gordon serial smashes into it, and they start their bodies spontaneously morph into weird phallic shapes whenever they pass near a black hole. It's unbelievably strange. Craig watched it for the first time, and literally, I think he emailed me. He's like, "WTF? What have we done? What did license and restore, and what are we foisting upon the innocent minds of the world?" It's amazing.
It's definitely amazing. One where I'm just like, I trust Dennis.
That was recommended to me as well. I mean, I think the important thing about being, whether it's a good film programmer, which, I've been for 35 years, or running a Blu-ray label, is to be open and welcome suggestions from other people who know a lot more about specific areas of filmmaking. When I, worked for the American Cinematheque, and if I wanted to do a spaghetti Western series, I would talk to people who were experts in spaghetti Westerns, right? And they would say, "Oh, hey, you have to show A Blind Man, the Ringo Starr spaghetti Western that was a ripoff of the Zatoichi movies." And I was like, "I'd never heard of that, and it's amazing." And they would say, "Oh, you've got to screen ... So we kind of we're open. We love it when we get lists of suggestions, and we now have a working document of possibilities for exploration that is many pages long, more movies than in 5 lifetimes we could ever license.
Yeah, a lot of times, we'll get somebody who'll send us a list of like 20 films that's their wish list, and there's usually a mix of we've never heard of it, and it doesn't look like it's something we might want to release. And there's always a few on there that we're like, oh yeah, we already looked into that, and it's either already been licensed or it's just not available. But then there's always one or two gems we're like, wow, I've never heard of that one. That looks kind of cool. And so that goes on we need to look into this list.
Well, and when I'll give you an example. So when we started putting out really weird and wonderful world animation, which is one of our favorite things, has been for years. And we started releasing films like Kalin Kazan's and Mircea Toya's Delta Space Mission and The Son of the Stars. People started sending us lists of other kind of wonderful and surreal animated movies. And one of the titles that kept turning up was an amazing Soviet animated sci-fi film called The Mystery of the Third Planet, which is visually stunning, like René Laloux, Fantastic Planet, Masters of Time, stunning. And it's a short feature. It's a little over 50 minutes long, and we're going to be putting it out next year in a beautiful new 4K scan, working with Soyuz Molt Film overseas. And that's a film that probably half a dozen people have said, hey, you guys should put out The Mystery of the Third Planet, and we're going to do it. So a lot of the movies that we wind up discovering, tracking down are because somebody who's, been obsessed, loved these movies is like, hey, you guys should da-da-da-da. So keep the recommendations coming. We love them.
Again, to reiterate, that's how you save cinema. You don't just steal it.
All of this 4K talk is a perfect way to get us into our first announcement for the month of October, which we have 2 to talk about, and one of these will be a part of the subscription, which is the first 4K, and that is Trapped Ashes, which is a little more personal for one of our Deaf Crocodile owners here than the other. Dennis, why don't you tell us about Trapped Ashes?
Trapped Ashes is kind of my baby. I wrote the script for it, and I produced it with 2 great friends of mine, husband and wife producing team of Yuko Yoshikawa and Yoshi Hosoya. And it's an anthology horror film that we made in 2006, 2007 with 5 really wonderful and unique filmmakers, kind of in the vein of the old Amicus Tales from the Crypt, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors movies. And the filmmakers were Joe Dante, who directed the wraparound segments, Ken Russell, Sean Cunningham directed the original Friday the 13th, of course, Monty Hellman from Tulane Blacktop and Cockfighter, and John Gaeta, who won Academy Awards for his groundbreaking visual effects on the Matrix films, and worked with the Wachowskis on a number of their movies like Speed Racer and others. And they each directed one of the segments in the movie. And a good friend of mine, filmmaker Adam Girash, after he saw an early screening of it, said, I love it. It's like a bunch of great filmmakers in the late 60s dropped acid and went out and decided to make a horror movie. And I was like, that's a really good description. That it's very surreal, macabre, grotesque, erotic. And it was, in a way, kind of my homage to the old Amicus anthology films. I was very good friends with Max Rosenberg, who was the co-founder with Milton Subotsky of Amicus Movies and joined us at the Cinematheque many times. And I loved Max. He was just a wonderful guy. And most of the filmmakers I knew through my work programming for the American Cinematheque in the 90s and early 2000s. Joe Dante, who was a great champion of film preservation and has a really wonderful and important collection of rare film prints himself that he's made available for screenings. Ken Russell, I knew through the Cinematheque, Monty Hellman. So it was also very much a kind of outgrowth of me programming for years and years at the Cinematheque. I'd worked as a screenwriter in the Hollywood studio system. I'd sold some scripts to New Line, to 20th Century Fox in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I got paid really good money, but I didn't have any control over whether the movies got made. And so I said, okay, if I want to see something get made, I'm probably going to need to learn how to produce it and partner with some people and raise money, which is how I wound up partnering with Yuko and Yoshi. And we raised a little under $4 million to make the movie from a trio of investors in Japan. So we're really fortunate, and we filmed in 3 countries, in Canada, here in Los Angeles at Universal Studios, because the movie is set primarily on a Hollywood movie studio tour where a group of tourists get trapped inside a infamous set from an old Roger Corman AIP style horror film. And then we also filmed one of the segments, Sean Cunningham's Jabaku, in Japan. So it was an amazing undertaking, great adventure. I had so much fun revisiting it years later, talking with a number of the people who worked with me on it. John Gaeta, one of the directors who did My Twin the Worm, which is sort of the most Cronenberg-like of the segments, really wonderful. Joined us the cinematographer Zoran Popovich, Ty Runyon and Tamo Penniket, who co-star in Monty Hellman's segment called Stanley's Girlfriend, about Stanley Kubrick in Hollywood in the 1950s, story about kind of witchcraft and vampirism and Stanley Kubrick. And
that seems to be
Scott
a
Lowell.
standout. That episode seems to be a standout. Like a lot of people, when we announced that this was getting released, like that segment alone, people are like, "Yeah, I've been wanting to see a good quality version of that Monty Hellman story for a long time." So, it is pretty darn good.
It was the first directing work that Monty had done in almost 13, 15 years, since Silent Night, Deadly Night, Part 3. And after that, Monty was able to direct his final feature-length film, Road to Nowhere, which is also a really wonderful kind of postmodern film noir, if people haven't seen it. And Monty, my friendship with Monty and seeing his struggles trying to get various film projects made was really the motivating force. That was the engine that kind of drove me to get Trapped Ashes made. It was so that Monty could direct again.
And you've got the great Zoom interview with a lot of the people involved in the film, and that interview kind of turned into a tribute to Monty Hellman. Like everyone was sharing their stories of Monty, and it was really nice.
Yeah. Oh my God, I adored Monty. He was a great, great friend for many years. Met him through the Cinematheque. We had many crazy adventures, and then we got to make a movie together. And I'm so glad that more than anything else, I think that's what I'm so happy about with Trapped Ashes, is that it gave Monty Hellman, who I said for many years, and I think I still say, even though he's not with us on this plane of existence anymore, I still think of him as America's greatest living filmmaker. I love Monty's movies so much, although none of them made any money when they first came out. So it was amazing to me that Monty, given how great his films were, hadn't gotten to make 4 to 5 times more movies. But then when you look at how little money his movies actually made, it was kind of amazing he got to make the movies he did. So
I may expose my ignorance here, but did he direct the last John Wayne movie? Was that him?
no.
Who?
No.
I thought he directed The Shootist.
Directed The Shooting.
The Shooting.
No.
I was close. I told you I was going to expose my ignorance.
The Shooting is a wonderful, surreal Western co-starring Millie Perkins and Jack Nicholson that Monty made for Roger Corman in the mid-'60s, when Corman essentially gave him $120,000, $60,000 a film, and said, go out into the desert and make 2 films. And he came back with The Shooting and Ride in the Whirlwind, which are both really fascinating.
I need to see those then.
Yeah, one of them written by Jack Nicholson and both co-starring Nicholson. But The Shooting is one of Monty's great masterpieces. Amazing film. I like The Shootist a lot too. That's also a really good film. And speaking of 4K UHD, we kind of backed into it. I won't say it was an accidental choice, but when we started talking about doing a new scan of Trapped Ashes, and we pulled the original film elements, which are stored at the Academy Film Archive, and a huge shout out to them for all the great work they do. We started talking about, should we scan them in 2K or 4K, and finally said, well, we may as well do 4K. And then we were like, okay, if we have them scanned in 4K, we really should do a 4K UHD release for this. And that's how we're winding up doing Trapped Ashes, which I know seems nepotistic because it is a movie that I produced and wrote. But we're going to be doing a lot more. Fella Day is coming out in 4K plus Blu-ray combo in December. And then Gwen and the Book of Sand. This is incredible French post-apocalyptic animated film. Will be a 4K and Blu-ray, and a number of our releases in 2025 will be 4K plus Blu-ray.
Will we get Nails in 4K? I saw you listed on that.
Oh my God, I would love to put it. I actually Nails was produced by some dear friends of mine, Brennan and John. Fantastic films, some of the best genre producers, filmmakers working in the world today in Dublin. Maybe at some point we can do a proper 4K and Blu-ray release of Nails, because I think it's only come out in DVD, certainly here in the US. Nails is the Irish supernatural horror film that I directed 2017. So yeah, no, it would be great at some point to put out a 4K Blu-ray of that too.
Amazing. So we got a 4K Blu-ray of Trapped Ashes, and we got this coming in the deluxe edition that we've been getting for the last few months. Can you share the special features and essays that we got coming on this one?
Wow, we got a ton. We are reprinting a great article that my dear friend Sean Decker wrote for Fangoria when the film came out, where he visited the set and got to interview some of the filmmakers who are now sadly no longer with us, like Ken Russell and Monty Hellman. I wrote an essay, My Memories of the Making of the Film. There's a great essay by Walter Chaw, he's a terrific film critic who basically is one of our go-to. Walter does essays now for every one of our releases. We have 3 separate new interviews that I conducted with members of the cast and crew. Actor Scott Lowell, who's fantastic. My younger brother, Jace, who's one of the lead cast members of the film. Production designer Rob Wilson King, who worked on Breaking Bad and Longmire and a lot of wonderful, wonderful films, joined us. And then we have the original full-length director's cuts of Monty's Stanley's Girlfriend episode and Ken Russell's The Girl with the Golden Breasts episode. We have the original kind of EPK behind-the-scenes interviews that we did when the film was made. So some of these were on the Lionsgate DVD release. So it's all that material and then a bunch of new essays and new interviews as well. And then we have a wonderful video essay as well that maybe you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, I'm gonna be bringing on Will and I to discuss at the very end of this episode. So stay tuned on that. We wrote a really fun essay on this that I'm still super proud of that one.
Yeah, we love. I have to say, we love the work that you and Will do for us on commentaries and video essays. And again, you're two of our favorite collaborators. Again, a huge shout out to the people like Beth Morris, an incredible graphic designer based in England. So Beth does the standard wrap designs and often the slipcase designs, although for this one, the slipcase design was done by artist Hans Woody, who did a really wonderful artwork illustration for us. And then Beth did the wrap design with the coffin and sort of psychedelic director's names surrounding it. But then we're really, so pleased when we get to work with like Stephen Bissett, who does commentaries for a lot of our releases, Sam Deegan, Jenny Barker, who writes essays for us. I mean, these are some of the people that we go to again and again. Yourself and Will. And that gives, I think, a real continuity. Walter Chaw doing essays for every one of our releases. At some point, we'll probably have to put out a booklet of all of Walter's essays for us. And he's such a wonderful writer. You and Will are such wonderful commentators and historians about media and film. So that's another one of the things that we just love doing about being a boutique Blu-ray label, is being able to collaborate with so many other people.
Yeah, it's been a big deal, and seeing all of the extras explode on these releases, to things that people appreciate, to things that give context for these films that have been quite unknown. And we actually have a portion of that on the other release as well that we're going to talk about. And this one's potentially a little more personal for Craig. So Craig, why don't you tell us about our second title that we're getting in October?
I would, but now instead of just chainsaws, there's now wood chipper going on.
Oh, I was kidding about the chainsaw.
So I can barely hear you. So I think Dennis is going to have to take this.
You got it. It is much louder.
Tamala 2010, A Punk Cat in Space, is one of the strangest and most wonderful Japanese animated features I've ever seen. It was done in the early 2000s by an art collective that go by the name of TOL, the acronym Trees of Life. And I actually screened it in the early 2000s when the film first came out, when I was programming for the American Cinematheque, the Egyptian Theater. And it's essentially the unholy marriage of Sanrio's Hello Kitty and Thomas Pynchon's novel, The Crying of Lot 49. So it's about this adorable punk kitty named Tamala, which was the name of one of the filmmaker's actual cats. So the two lead characters are named Tamala and Michelangelo. And in the interview that we did, which is on the Blu-ray with one of the co-directors, who didn't want to appear on screen, and so we have a graphic of, I think, Michelangelo, one of the kitties from the film, and we hear Kay's voice. And it turns out that Tamala and Michelangelo were his kitties in real life, and Tamala was a Destructo kitty. And so he named her after Godzilla. Tamala is like Godzilla. Tama plus Allah, Godzilla kitty. So Tamala 2010 was actually a very personal project for them as well. And it is essentially about corporate domination of the modern world, and is one of the densest and most kind of intellectually challenging animes ever made. It brings in a lot of influences from Murakami and the super flat art movement, which if there's some modern art fans will be familiar with among our listeners. And it really is not like any anime made before or since. And the amazing thing, which I don't know if this has really been widely announced, is the filmmakers have done a sequel, which will hopefully be coming out shortly. And they were generous enough to let us include a short teaser for the new Tamala movie, which looks fantastic, by the way, on the Blu-ray release of Tamala 2010. And that was another one where it took us quite a long time to track down the rights holders. It's not the company that originally put it out in the 2000s. In Japan is no longer in business. And it was actually part of it wasn't just a standalone feature. They did several short films, two of which we've included on the Blu-ray. The third one, unfortunately, was not available for rights reasons. But it was part of a kind of art. It was an art project. So there was merchandising, there were kind of pop-up art events, there were the films, there was music. So TOL also composed this amazing sort of electronica spacey lounge score, which is fantastic to the film. So it continued for a couple years and then kind of petered out. But now, a number of years later, TOL are back with a new Tamala film. So it's actually very good timing that we're putting it out for the first time ever on physical media in the States. It had a brief theatrical release when it first came out, and then that was it. Like, it never came out here on DVD or Blu-ray. And it's been actually quite hard to see for many years. You can see little clips from the original online, but now people are going to get to experience the original film in all its kind of surreal, jaw-dropping glory. And it is super insane. And especially if you love kind of punk aesthetic, it very much has the spirit of like punk rock, punk sci-fi, punk literature, punk comics. That's a real big theme in the movie as well. So it's super fun. I love Tamala 2010. Just an amazing movie.
If somehow that was not enough to entice you to want to check this one out, please do yourself a favor and go watch the trailer at least. This movie, it is so difficult to describe the aesthetics because it changes so often. It is a mixture of animation styles that it'll blow your mind. This movie is gorgeous. It is adult. It is fun. It is everything that you could want from a crazy titled film like Tamala 2010, A Punk Cat in Space. This movie's amazing.
So,
glad you like it.
What was I'm just curious about the decision, because this is y'all's first one that is going to be couponed. This is for the subscribers, not included in the 12 months. So what was the decision to have this one as part of that rather than one of the subscriber titles?
Well, we had to, so for the 6-month and the 12-month subscribers, essentially it's a release a month, but October is going to be our first of many months to come where we're putting out 2 releases, because we've actually now licensed so many movies that we have to start putting out 2 a month to kind of get through the backlog. And in the case of these 2, we thought, well, the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray for Trapped Ashes is sort of it's also the pricier of the 2. And so that's the one we've decided to include as the subscription. And then if people want to purchase Tamala, they get a coupon. Is it 40% off, Craig?
Well, yeah, I think that's the plan, yeah.
40% off, yeah. And we're going to do the same thing in December. Fella Day, which will also be a 4K plus Blu-ray release, will be the one that ships for subscribers. And then they can purchase, if they want, Jerzy Weiss's The Golden Fern, which is our second release in December at a 40% discount. So we want to keep faith with the subscribers and also offer them a discount if they want to get the second release as well.
Cool. I got to point out the evocative art this month. We already talked about Trapped Ashes a little bit, but this month, these 2 titles are just gorgeous box art. The what you will see on the inside, but also the films themselves, both full of incredible imagery, lots of colors, lots of things that will make you delighted to be holding these in your hand. I'm sure the booklets are going to look incredible. We went through all the features for the first release. Can you share the supplements for Tamala, Dennis?
Real quickly though, the Trapped Ashes is also the booklet is 80 pages instead of 60, so it's a little bit beefier because we had a lot of content to put in that booklet.
And it's going to be the same thing for Fella Day. It's going to be a longer booklet because we have not only the essays, but we have a lot of amazing production artwork shared with us by the animation team. Paul Bolger was one of the key animators in particular for Fella Day. And so there was so much amazing stuff. We were like, we got to do an 80-page booklet instead of 60. But for Tamala 2010, our special features, we have 2 of the original Tamala short films, Tamala on Parade, which is 24 minutes, and Tamala's Wild Party, which is 16 minutes. We have a new video interview with the co-director, co-creator of the whole sort of Tamala art project, K of TOL. We have a new commentary track by Sam Deegan, who we love, wonderful film historian. We have a visual essay by Ryan Verrill and Dr. Will Dodson. And Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I will say this was the first visual essay where I struggled to limit the visuals that I was putting in the essay because this film has so many gorgeous examples of things to share, because I kind of wanted to get all of the styles that they have in this, but it became too many. There's so many things that you could share to speak on, but also the context of this in regards to the history of anime and animation from Japan and that area. It was important to discuss, and so I think we did a pretty fair job of spreading the love across that timeline. But yeah, Will and I will talk about this a little more in the episode in just a little bit.
Well, the irony is that I love Japanese cinema. I have a family connection. My mom, Leanne, was an actress briefly in 1959, 1960 in Japanese B-movies when she lived in Tokyo and worked for Nikatsu and Toho Films. So I grew up kind of hearing about her time working in the Japanese movie industry. I produced Trapped Ashes. We filmed part of it, and it is technically a kind of a U.S.-Japanese co-production because all the finance came from Japan. So October, we are actually putting out our first 2 films from Japan, not for lack of trying, because there's been a number of movies that we've actually gone after, and for whatever reasons, either we're not able to license or will be coming out. We do have some more Japanese movies coming out in our schedule for 2025, including one we have not 100% closed the deal on, but it is an incredible animated Japanese monster
Very
movie.
excited for that one.
Me too.
Blow people's minds. Amazing Japanese anime creature feature monster movie. Oh, so excited. Another one where we're paying to have the negative scanned and the audio transferred. So we do have more Japanese content coming out for sure. But these are our first two, Tamala 2010 and Trapped Ashes as a co-production. Would not have been made. We couldn't have made Trapped Ashes without the Japanese finance, that they were willing to take a risk on such a strange and surreal anthology horror project. And in my essay, I also talk about the directors who were approached or attached to the project, who dropped out. Toby Hooper and Dario Argento were actually attached to direct episodes, and both dropped out before the film was made. And there's a very funny story about me approaching my friend Werner Herzog as well at a Starbucks in Hollywood to try to convince him to direct one of the episodes in Trapped Ashes. So I won't give away, but it is one of my favorite anecdotes. Even though Werner didn't wind up directing on the film, I love that story connected to Trapped Ashes. So,
Nice.
Artwork, Beth Morris, who we love and work with on every one of our releases now. Amazingly talented British artist and graphic designer. So Beth did both the deluxe slipcase artwork and the standard wrap for Tamala 2010, and I think she did a brilliant job. And we're going to be, by the time this comes out, I think we'll have released the wrap artwork for both that and Trapped Ashes, which she did. And I think she did a wonderful job with both.
With speaking of artwork, I figured it'd be a good time to shout out Dead Crocodile that you guys just released.
That's Craig. Craig, you got to...
Yeah, okay. You bear with the wood chipper. I will try to get closer to the microphone.
Margo! Everybody's going in the wood chipper. God, I love Fargo.
So yeah, the Dead Crocodile. Actually, the funny origin of that was I was talking to my mother, and she was asking me about our company, and she referred to it as Dead Alligator, and I was like, "No, it's Deaf Crocodile." And she's like, "Oh, same thing." So Dead Crocodile got into my head, and then I realized, like, we have a horror film coming up. That would be kind of fun to just create a logo special just for this release. And so I reached out to Brian Level, who had designed our original logo. He also did the artwork for the Pied Piper release. And I said, Brian, I suspect the answer is going to be an enthusiastic yes, because this is right up your alley. But could you create a zombified version of our crocodile? And he was like, hell yes. And just like our original logo, literally first take, he was like, how's this? And I'm like, absolutely perfect.
And now I keep trying to put it on every release, and Craig's like, no, wait, that's not a horror film.
Yeah, it has to be a horror film.
It's sort of horror. Some bad things happen at one point. That makes it a horror.
Just yesterday, so it'll certainly be up, when this releases, because it's up there now, but I added some merch to our shop, so you can get Dead Crocodile t-shirts and Dead Crocodile mugs.
God damn it, Craig. Now I got to spend money.
And we've got, we're working on getting some pins made as well. So yeah, it seems people seem to like it. Hopefully they'll buy some merch, because it is a fun logo. And we were hoping people would get a kick out of playing with the logo for this release.
Well, my wife Maria, who has, I would say, an unnatural fear of alligators and crocodiles, but she would say it's perfectly natural because she considers them living dinosaurs, monsters, dragons from another epoch.
She's not wrong.
And only animals that really freak her out, alligators and crocodiles. But she loves, of course, Deaf Crocodile and the Dead Crocodile, and realized our regular Deaf Crocodile logo is named Romero. And she said, well, this one should be called George.
Yep.
And I was like, damn, I wish I'd thought of that.
So is this a one-time variation type thing, or is there maybe an opening that other variations of the crocodile will make its way in the other types of releases?
I hadn't really thought that far ahead. We don't have... We kind of do everything by the seat of our pants.
I understand.
I tried to talk Craig into doing a deaf, DEF crocodile, like Def Leppard. He wouldn't go for it. He's like, no, we can't do Def Leppard crocodile. But maybe if we do a documentary about Def Leppard or, something.
If
Def
we do
Jam.
a documentary about Def Leppard, that's pretty much the only way that's happening.
Dennis will now be looking for documentaries
I
on
am
Def
going
Leppard.
online right now.
It'll be that, or it'll be licensing a Most Deaf film.
Most Def or Def Jam.
There you go.
What about Def Jam? He shot me down on that one. I thought that would be so, clearly, Craig is the arbiter of good taste in the company. Yeah. I'm hoping that we put out. In fact, if this Japanese animated horror film comes through as we are fully expecting it to, hopefully, that would be a Dead Crocodile, because that is a horror movie, animated, but it's definitely a horror film. And I don't know. Tonally, can we call Freckled Max a Dead Crocodile release?
Mm.
Okay,
it has monsters, but it's not a horror film.
It's a creature feature. No, it's very sweet, very bittersweet and lovely. I don't know if we're going to be announcing it soon, but we can talk about it here. So we're putting out an amazing Slovakian creature feature, monster movie called Freckled Max and the Spooks in spring of 2025. Directed by Juraj Jakubishko, who was a very important filmmaker in the Czech New Wave and in Slovakian cinema. And it's the feature version of a multi-part TV series he directed called Frankenstein's Aunt. So it's sort of like Ingmar Bergman, you had the longer TV version of Fanny and Alexander, and then there's the shorter feature version, which I actually prefer the feature than the longer TV one. So we're putting out the shorter feature version, which is amazing, and it's about all of the classic monsters: Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, Elizabeth Bathory, various other monsters who are all holed up in a remote castle, kind of hiding from the world because it's like the island of misfit toys. They are kind of feared and hated and misunderstood. And this orphaned boy discovers them in the castle and kind of helps them to try and resolve their problems. And it's really lovely. It's got a bit of the vibe of like the Monster Squad, the 80s creature feature that people love. And it co-stars Ferdinand Main, who was in Polanski's Fearless Vampire Killers and a number of other movies, was a wonderful character actor who I actually knew in the early 90s. He's still with us, lived in Hollywood, used to come to a lot of Cinematheque screenings. Eddie Constantine is in it, who was played Lemmy Caution in Godard's Alphaville. Vivica Lindfors plays the Countess Frankenstein, wonderful actress. It's just filled with amazing performances in this sort of lovely, bittersweet tone. And it is a monster movie. It's not horrifying. It's got monsters, so I'm going to argue that we could do Dead Crocodile, but I think Craig's going to shoot me down on that. He's nodding. He's like, yeah. It's not gonna fly.
Don't want to dilute the brand.
See? Yeah, it's gotta be straight horror. Monsters aren't enough. See?
Craig is just a stickler. Yeah, these are two great announcements today, obviously. Love Trapped Ashes, love Tamala 2010. Both available to pre-order as of today when you're hearing this. Anything else that we want to bring up before we head out for the day, gentlemen?
Quick shout out to you had mentioned the trailer for Tamala, and everyone should check it out. Obviously, they should check out the Trapped Ashes trailer as well. And our editor for trailers is Anna Kapersky, who she does all our trailers and does an incredible job.
Great work.
And the Tamala trailer in particular, when we got that back from her, we were like, "Oh wow, you've outdone yourself. This is terrific."
Yeah.
Yeah, as I was saying before, although it looks like it's just Craig and I at Deaf Crocodile, we in fact rely on a number of amazing collaborators across the country and even around the world, like Anna Kaperska, it's overseas as well. David McKenzie at Fidelity in Motion, who does the amazing authoring for all of our Blu-rays and now 4K UHD, and absolutely, most important, our distribution partner, Jesse Nelson at Diabolic DVD. We could not be doing these new releases without Jesse's support. And we're super thrilled to be collaborating with him and Diabolic on making these available. People can purchase them either through the Diabolic DVD website, through our website directly. They're actually going to be available increasingly in a number of brick and mortar stores across the country. Craig, I don't know, do you want to mention some of the brick and mortar stores?
I don't know yet. We're working that out.
We're working on it right now.
But yeah, they are. We should be available in more and more places as places reach out to us to carry our stuff. Just the other day, I had somebody from Long Beach reach out. They want to keep it in their store. So yeah, hopefully we're continuing to try and get our stuff out there as many places as possible. So yeah, if you have trouble finding our stuff and you have a particular favorite brick and mortar store or even an online retailer that's your preferred vendor, if they're not carrying it, reach out to them and say, hey, I want to buy this, but I want to buy it from you. Can you please carry it? And then they can reach out to us. Because, yeah, we want our stuff available, easily available for everybody. But like Dennis said, Diabolic is our partner, and he's been in business for a long, long time. So he has a loyal following of customers, and for good reason. So yeah, I recommend if you are having trouble finding it and you can't get it, Diabolic DVD or our own web shop will always be available.
Well, and then just finally, we haven't mentioned it at all, but we will be talking a lot about it shortly, is Robert Wynne Simmons' The Outcasts, which is this incredible Irish folk horror, folklore, witchcraft movie that we're putting out in November, working with the filmmaker. Beautiful new restoration by the Irish Film Institute, and a number of Robert's early... they are technically amateur films, but are really fascinating, that he shot on 8mm and discovered the only surviving copies in a shoebox in his closet, and we had them scanned. Amazing sort of occult themed short movies that he made in the 60s. And then by the time this comes out, it will have also been announced. We mentioned earlier, the next month we have 2 releases coming out is February. And the first of the releases we've actually already announced and teased 2 amazing East German space operas directed by Gottfried Kolditz for the DEFA, which was the state-run East German film studio in the early 70s. Signals, A Space Adventure, which was East Germany's attempt to outdo Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, shot in 70 millimeter. Never before released on physical media anywhere in the world, I think. And then In the Dust of the Stars, which is this incredible kind of Zardoz meets Planet of the Vampires film. Just amazing that he did in the mid-70s. And then our second release that month, which will have been announced by the time this airs, is, as we said, Jean-François Le Guillaume's Gwen and the Book of Sand, which is this wholly remarkable French post-apocalyptic animated film. And it's sort of like, in Mad Max Fury Road, when Furiosa and Max get to what is supposedly the Green Land, and it turns out to all be desert, a bunch of women survivors out there. If you made an animated sci-fi film that is just that, just traversing this incredible, surreal desert landscape, it would be Gwen and the Book of Sand. It is one of the great animated sci-fi films ever made. It's on par with Mamoru Oshii's Angel's Egg, Fantastic Planet, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, about this teenage girl's quest to try and rescue her boyfriend who's been kidnapped by these sort of mysterious kind of alien forces. Animated using the gouache technique. Visually, it is unbelievably gorgeous movie. How it has remained off the radar for so many years, I don't know, because it is a masterpiece.
It is kind of amazing that this isn't a better known film.
Oh my God!
Gwen the animation. A lot of people were blown away when they saw the animation of Belladonna of Sadness or Heroic Times, where it kind of looks like a painting come to life. This is similarly, the artwork is just astonishing. And this will be a 4K HDR release, so it's gonna blow your eyeballs out of your head.
If you love great world animation, Gwen and the Book of Sand is going to be, I think, an incredible discovery. The filmmaker, Jean-François Le Guillaume, is, thank God, still with us. We did a long interview with him. He's super excited for his film coming out in the U.S. for the first time on physical media, and it's going to be, I think, a gorgeous release. So those are a couple upcoming that I want to highlight.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll be talking about The Outcast more in depth in November, of course. And we got lots more to come soon. We're even talking about doing some bonus episodes soon with some other friends of Deaf Crocodile, and some collaborators come in to discuss some of those. Gentlemen, thanks for hanging out today. Zach, thanks for all that.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to transition over to myself and Dr. Will Dodson talking about those visual essays to see if we can entice you to purchase these 2 titles even more. But in the meantime, have a good rest of your week, and we will talk to you on the next episode. All right, here with Dr. Will Dodson, my producing partner at Someone's Favorite Productions. Will, how you doing? Glad to have you here.
I'm good, Ryan. Pretty excited to talk about these.
Yeah, we got 2 releases from Deaf Crocodile coming out this month, and we are fortunate enough to be on both of them. One of them, let's talk about Trapped Ashes first. This one was a little different for us because, we're submitting the visual essay to the gentleman that wrote the film to review it and consider putting it on his disc. Why don't you share how we approach this one, some of the things that you researched and stuff?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting film. And as you say, submitting it to the writer is a little bit fraught because the essay that we put together is one that is kind of interpretive of the film, looking at what we came to see as one of the major highlights, the major themes of the film, which was an underlying thread of hysteria. The film's really interesting because it's an anthology film. It's a wraparound segment and four shorts, and they're connected as tales being told by these strangers who are in a house in Hollywood where a legendary film, Hysteria, had been filmed, had been produced. And so I spent a lot of time researching the history of hysteria, the term itself, the psychological condition that has historically been ascribed to women. Hystera in ancient Greek means womb or uterus, and so from that root term, the idea of hysteria is a condition that describes pretty much the gamut of physical and mental illnesses that women can suffer or be labeled as a sort of method of containment and dismissal. So we looked at hysteria as a specifically feminine trait, both in the stories with women protagonists, but we also looked at male hysteria, right? A sort of feminized quality ascribed to male characters. And we traced that through line of hysteria as a theme through all the stories and the wraparound as a way of kind of thinking about Trapped Ashes as having this kind of symbolic value that might not be readily observed by a casual viewer.
Yeah, I feel like with the context of our essay, if you have enjoyed from the last couple of years some of the boutique releases that have done well, like Criminally Insane for Vinegar Syndrome or the House of Psychotic Women box set for Severin, or, of course, Kayla Janice's book over the last decade that has now come out in multiple editions, I feel like thematically you might enjoy some of our commentary on this film itself. But that also brings us to the second release of the month, and that is Tamala 2010, A Punk Cat in Space, which I think that we both had a lot more fun putting together than we expected. How do you feel about this one, looking back at it?
It's a really challenging film because it combines so many animation styles, so much history, a kind of cut and paste aesthetic from 70s and 80s punk, and this fairly open critique of modern global capitalism. And so researching this film, we looked at the history of anime, the history of Japanese animation, going all the way back to World War II and coming up to the present. And we kind of wove that history together with the development of capitalism in the global age, in the digital age. And so we bring in some perspectives on how consumerism developed, how it kind of conditions the way we see the world, the commodification of images into consumable products. We decided not to examine ourselves too much and reflect on the consumer impulse of collecting physical media. We'll leave that for another essay. But certainly you can extrapolate from there.
And if you want to indulge that, I'm very excited to say, as somebody that has a very lacking history with anime, this movie is compelling with or without that sort of passion for that genre. So hopefully, this visual essay is one thing that we can use to entice you to take a look at this. But yeah, the film itself is anime, but a very different style, very different delivery, very adult look at this complex idea throughout, and it is so well done. I mean, all of the different animation styles are something that will keep you interested through the entire running length, but our visual essay, I feel like, complements it pretty well.
Yeah, and I think, for those who are kind of casual fans or unfamiliar with anime, I think going back to that commodification angle, the term anime, especially for Western consumers, has come to refer to a specific style of Japanese animation, when in fact anime is just animation that's from Japan. And this particular film does not conform to that kind of style that you associate with something like Akira or Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon or any of those kind of iconic style setters. This is very much a film that uses animation, and again, hit on that term cut and paste aesthetic. It combines so many different images and styles into its mise en scène, I guess, into its compositions, that it really is its own entity. And so if you're not well versed in the history of anime or not really a fan of anime, this film is still something that you might be interested in watching, because it is not at all really connected to the popular style that we come to associate with anime today.
On that note, we hope that we have further piqued your interest in these two titles. You can check out the links in the description below to purchase them. You can check out more of our podcast at the Someone's Favorite Productions Podcast Network at the link in the description as well. We want to thank again Zach Bryant from They Live by Film, Will Dodson, and of course Craig Rogers and Dennis Bartok from Deaf Crocodile, and we will see you in next month's episode.
The audio commentary. It's a dying art form, but here at One Track Mind, I, your wonky yet affable host Ryan Luis Rodriguez, analyze film through the prism of these embryonic forms of podcasting, one audio commentary at a time. Masterpieces, crapster pieces, live action, animation, cult classics, films literally no one has ever heard of. No track is too small, and no track is too big. Join me and my guests from the entertainment world as we keep these features alive every other Tuesday. Hey, who else is going to discuss Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey one week and Citizen Kane the next? Us, that's who. Sure, you have to put up with my voice, but there's a certain give and take in this industry. That's One Track Mind, part of the Someone's Favorite Productions family, and available wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions Podcast Network, please select the link in the description